Welcome to hour two of Saturday of the Multiverse Fundraiser. I'm Kelly Guentner. I have Hollis Thompson with me. I have Paley, aka Anthony Vernon, with me. And we are going to talk about X-Men and why it's an allegory for the civil rights movement and
Woo!
also civil rights for all sorts of minority groups rippling through the decades. So, welcome everyone. First of all, I want to say that we're here raising money for comic books for kids. Let me get our banner up. You can donate at our Facebook page. If you go to Facebook, .com/the multiverse fundraiser, we have a donation link running. Otherwise, if you're more comfortable donating directly at the website, either way, the donations go directly to Comic Books for Kids, which is focused on getting comic books and other comfort items to children in cancer centers and hospitals across the US and Canada and in other parts of the world. So, that said, let's get into our topic today. Hollis, do you want to give an intro?
Sure. So the X-Men are one of, if not the most popular, historically speaking, comic book superhero team / franchise in history. There are very, very few that have rivaled the X-Men. And one of the things that's so fascinating about that is the X-Men, from their very beginning with Stan Lee and Jack Kirby in the 60s, were meant to be a allegory of sorts for the civil rights movement. Because you have to remember, back when Lee and Kirby were writing this, they were in the thick of it in the 60s with the Birmingham and the sit-ins and the protests and the things with the bus. All of that was going on. That was what was on the news every single night. It was either that or Vietnam, right? That was on the news every night. That is the world they were inhabiting. And Lee has talked about in interviews how the basic thing he wanted to do with the X-Men was to create a comic book series that would instill in his readers, who at the time would have been mostly adolescent boys, that racism is wrong. That was just the basic idea that he wanted to get across. And so that's why he created the concept of this race of humans, right? That because of their genetics have these extra abilities that make them different and other from the rest of humanity and that isolate them and cause them to suffer this extreme amount of prejudice, of racism, right, by the rest of humanity. And that was, again, generally speaking, just in general, racism is wrong, but also very specifically to the civil rights movement that was happening at the time with the issues of the Jim Crow laws and the discrimination, segregation, Brown versus Board of Education, all of those types of things, specifically with Black people in America. That was very, very, very much on Lee and Kirby's mind when they were creating this series.
Exactly. And so Curly Vanessa, my Phoenix sisters, weighing in and saying the X-Men are the best. And then Dave Mattingly says we're all weirdos in our own way, which I think is why X-Men resonates so much, because we all can relate to this. Sorry, Anthony, I cut you off. What were you going to say?
No, a couple things. Firstly, anytime you think of X-Men, you always think of that 90s theme song. Like, it's just kind of ingrained in your head at this point. But I think when I think about, because my comic book knowledge wasn't like, I think the first Spider-Man and X-Men were kind of like my gateways into like and Batman, I guess. But I just remember watching those cartoons as a kid, and just like, it was the first time that I noticed, like, you had the main heroes, and instead of them being liked by everybody and just going about their lives, I saw all this like hatred. And at the time, that really like it struck a chord with me because I'm just like, this is not right. Like, everyone's supposed to be nice to each other in cartoons except for the bad guys. And it was just one of those things that struck with me. And then, you know, learning more about how it is an allegory for civil rights. And obviously, I still think that those allegories still exist today. Like, one of the things I thought of is the first Black Panther movie, and maybe even the second one, how there's that difference between Prince T'Challa and Killmonger. I almost said Kilgrave. We got too many similar names because we got Ironmonger, Killmonger, Kilgrave. But Killmonger, I definitely saw that a bit as like a very civil rights, but like from two different sides. You have Prince T'Challa wanting to do it peacefully and represent, and then you have Killmonger who wants to just militarize and stuff like that. And I definitely feel like you see that with Magneto and Charles Xavier. And I'm going to let you say it because I know you know like the two sides of that argument.
Yeah, I think that it's very obvious when you read the comics that Charles Xavier and Magneto are kind of thinly veiled symbols for Martin Luther King Jr. on the one hand and Malcolm X on the other hand. And that's because, again, that's the world that they were inhabiting right at that time. Those were the two prominent figures, leadership anyway, of the civil rights movement that both had two extremely different approaches, right? For those of you who may not be super familiar with US history and the civil rights movement, Dr. King was coming from a Christian tradition that was very radically nonviolent, right? That taking Jesus's teachings about if somebody slaps you, turn the other cheek, right? Do not repay evil, or do not repay evil with evil, all those sorts of ideas. And Dr. King took that very, very, very seriously in his approach to civil rights, where the idea was you would do civil disobedience in the sense of refusing to move from the white counter, right? This thing that's only supposed to be white people. You would have marches, right, where they would disrupt traffic and all that kind of stuff. But they would never do anything violent, even when people were enacting violence upon them, right? And you can see all the videos, right, like in Birmingham and the different places where this really came to a head, where police are sicking literal dogs on these people and using the fire hoses on them, and they're not fighting back, right? They are literally just taking the punches because the idea was you do not fight evil with evil, you fight evil with love, right? Even love for your enemies. And that was Martin Luther King's whole philosophy. Malcolm X, on the other side, right, coming from a completely different worldview, coming from Islam and some other influences on his thinking, was that, look, Black people, people of African descent in this country are being oppressed, are being violently killed throughout their history, lynchings, things like that, with absolutely no repercussions. So therefore, yeah, it would be great if Black people and white people could just get along, but Black people need to do whatever it takes to protect themselves, even if that means meeting force for force and having violence for violence in terms of what is going on. And you see that, I think, played out pretty clearly in Charles Xavier on the one hand, right, who is the whole point of the X-Men is to be a superhero group that will fight for the good of the very people who hate them, right? For the humans who hate the mutants to do good for them, and that way they can become these kind of ambassadors to bring goodwill. Whereas Magneto, on the other hand, thinks that that's hopelessly idealistic, right? And that what would be best for mutants is for mutants to just take over and be able to create, therefore, a safe society.
Yeah. It a really interesting dichotomy, and I love that it plays out across every adaptation of X-Men, and it's really powerful. And it also, I love that the X-Men animated series really brought X-Men to a new generation, and really reach a new generation of kids. So we had the 60s X-Men, the comics reach the kids that it needed to reach. And then the 90s X-Men brought X-Men into a new relevancy. And so Hollis, this is our second time discussing this topic. I'm gonna quick plug our podcast because we did just drop the episode that was basically a prologue to this discussion where we discussed X-Men fighting for civil rights since 1963. It's available on Spotify and a few other places. But we made the point that basically X-Men resonates because it has been discussing this topic that continues to be relevant. But we also talked about the fact that Lee and Kirby made the choice in 63 to have an all-white team stand in for the civil rights movement. And we talked about the fact that actually today it would be a terrible choice, to be clear.
Yes.
But at the time, it was, I think, the right choice because they had to reach their audience. And having the X-Men be a stand-in having white people be a stand-in reach the audience it needed to be because their audience was predominantly white. And so it gave them a way in. And so them being mutants was the allegory they needed. This is the only time I'm going to say it's okay to have an all-white team, just to say that.
It was a different time back in the 60s.
And
I
again,
think with the comics... Oh, sorry.
No, you go, Kelly. I talk way too much.
No, you don't. No, you don't. You have a lot of good things to say. But I think with the comics code also, they would have had a hard time even getting approval for main characters who were Black, which sucks. That's a whole other topic. But
I mean, totally different franchise here. But there's an episode of Deep Space Nine where Benjamin Sisko was having this. He was kind of in this world where he was a writer and he wanted to write the sci-fi story about, a captain that was Black and stuff like that, and like basically write about the real Deep Space Nine. And he pitched it, and he wrote it, and he printed it, and then like his manager came back and says just like, well, unfortunately, that's not coming out. It's been pulped, and you've been fired. And it was just like one of those things where it's just like, yep, that definitely sounds like the world. So I get that.
It's depressing.
I also want to point out that you have to think about who Lee was trying to talk to, right? Because the minority Black readers of comic books in the 60s, they didn't need to be taught that racism is wrong, right? They knew very innately, very practically, right?
Excuse me.
That racism is wrong. It was the white kids who needed to know that, right? Who needed to be taught that. And again, for the time, just frankly, getting a bunch of white kids to read a comic book about Black people in the 60s would have been a really hard sell. And so, yeah, as scandalous as it is, especially with these figures, right, to say like Martin Luther King and Malcolm X represented by characters with white skin tones, right? As scandalous as that sounds, I do think ultimately it was a practical choice on Lee and Kirby's hands to try to accomplish what they were trying to accomplish at the time. And also worth noting, Stan Lee and Jack Kirby were both Jews. And even though they may not have had the kind of systemic oppression that people of African descent have had in America, there was still an extreme amount of racism and prejudice and discrimination against Jewish people in this country. And so I think that's part of why Lee and Kirby were so sympathetic to people like Martin Luther King and the plight of Black people in America, because they knew what it was like to face racism and face prejudice.
And I like this comment from Crayley. So by X-Men Revelation, the X-Men themselves begin to disagree on whether or not it is ever okay to kill, as all mutants are facing extinction, which is an interesting problem that I feel like that's an interesting conversation that is also relevant. Like, is it okay to kill? Is it okay? And, personally, no, it's not. But
I will
if
say,
you're, oh, go ahead.
historically speaking, I think history has proved that Dr. King was right, because what ultimately happened, specifically because television, right, was also coming into existence at this time, the fact that the entire country was able to see these people being beat with bats again, all this kind of stuff, and not fighting back, that was, I think, the single greatest thing that propelled the civil rights movement forward, because all of America got to see the goodness of these people, right? Their innate goodness, their innate love that they had, even for the people who were oppressing them, and got to see just the blatant evil of the people who were attacking them and who were oppressing them. And that really shifted the moral spectrum of the country into the side of the civil rights movement. And again, I think that is Dr. King's lasting legacy, is that his methods ultimately worked. They didn't work in his lifetime. He didn't get to see it to the end because he was himself a victim of the violence. But in the end, it did work. That's not to say that racism is gone and that all the problems are fixed, obviously.
Obviously.
But it's better than it was, right? It is significantly better than it used to be. And the civil rights King's methods, which ultimately are really historically Jesus and Gandhi's methods, right? They work, right? They do ultimately cause change to happen.
I think also the world sometimes needs a balance of the Kings and the Malcolm X's, and I think a good X-Men story shows that, and a lot of good X-Men stories humanize the Magneto point of view, the Malcolm X point of view, and Magneto is such a dynamic character because you understand why he's angry. He's not just like a bad guy who's just bad to be bad. He's a bad guy because he's lost his family. He's seen he's seeing his people exterminated. And honestly, like, I can empathize with Magneto and I can empathize with Malcolm X. And
Well,
I feel like X-Men does a really good job of bringing that story in a safe space for people to explore. It kind of takes the baggage out. Any preconceived notions are out the window and people can explore that. And once they make those real world connections, it can help them with those empathies.
Yeah, and on top I'm sorry, were you finished or?
Oh yeah, I was finished. Go ahead.
Another thing that I think always kind of I found interesting, especially in the newer cartoon, like you'll see members of the X-Men kind of break off from X-Men and join Magneto's side because of their views and things like that. And I mean, I think that's shown in a lot, like even the movies, you see that in a lot, like in the first trilogy, the second movie that they had, when you have Pyro, who was very, no pun intended, hot-headed, and eventually he joins with the Brotherhood of Mutants, and then in the First Class trilogy, Mystique ends up joining with Magneto and things like that. So I've always found that interesting, how they, like, you have this balance, and sometimes it like shifts based on what's going on in their lives.
And that ties in really well with Crayley's comment, which the narrative hill I will die on is that you can't represent oppression of a group without showing a disagreement of methods within that group. Otherwise, you're treating that group as a monolith, which is so accurate. Like, not all mutants are the same. Not all Black people are the same. Not all disabled people are the same. Not all gay people are the same. It's really great that X-Men showcases that oppressed people don't all think the same. They don't all feel the same. They don't all respond to their oppression the same, and that's valid.
Mm-hmm. I get this one post always comes up, and I keep referencing the movies because I think that's where I have the most X-Men experience. Like, even though people have varied views on the movies, but like, I know we can all say that the third in the first trilogy, Last Stand, was definitely the weakest. But there was one scene in particular where Rogue comes in because they say they found the mutant cure, and she like comes in and it's like, oh, they find a cure, and then Storm just instantly interrupts her. It's like, no, we're like, there is no cure. We are who we are. And one of the things that I think of, it's like, you have Storm and you have Rogue. Storm is like super powerful, controls weather, and then Rogue, who basically can steal other people's life force by touching them. And really, she just wants to feel touch without being able to hurt someone. And it's kind of interesting because you have those two viewpoints where it's like, you have Storm, who's like super powerful, has like a pretty awesome ability, and she's saying, they're like, we don't need the cure. Whereas Rogue, who just wants a hug, basically, to put it, and just to kind of just push that off to the side. It's just like, we don't always understand other people's views, and it's kind of like, even in civil rights and things like that, one Black person's views might sit differently than another person's Black views. And this is something that I guess I can speak from personal experience, being a bit different from other African Americans that I grew up with. I have a different view, whereas someone like my brother, who's dealt with more stuff, he has a totally different view. And it's fine. It's just kind of, we agree to disagree on things, and that's how it is.
One of the most impactful quotes on me that I've seen is that if you talk to a member of X community, right? If you talk to a Black person, if you talk to a gay person, if you talk to a disabled person, whatever, then you've known one person, right? That's what it boils down to. You cannot extrapolate the views of one individual and try to make that, universalize that, or generalize it. You have to take people as individuals.
Agreed. And Crayley says, Paley, that's a perfect example. It's not just that people disagree on principle. People have different brains and bodies overall, and experiences, of course. She feels that in the neurodivergent community.
Yeah.
Dave Mattingly sums it up. Pretty Cloud Girl says, we don't need a cure, to the girl who kills everything she touches.
Exactly.
Yep.
And that
sums it up. And yeah, that's basically, and X-Men is so good for showcasing that in a fun fantasy scenario, because all the X-Men are so different, and their powers are different, and their experiences are different. And then the nice thing that X-Men has done in more recent years is they've layered on, each X-Men also has other is members of other oppressed groups. So Magneto is also Jewish, and he went through Nazi Germany and lost his family that way. So that adds another layer to the character. Kitty Pryde is Jewish. She's younger, so she didn't go through Nazi Germany, but that does layer into the character. There's a lot of X-Men characters who are gay or bi or trans, which also adds dimensions to the character and underscores the allegory. And then Anthony, you and I had talked about Monet St. Croix.
Mm-hmm.
I know you said you were gonna. Did you get the chance to research her a little?
You know, I did a little research, but I wasn't able to find any like things that really discussed her neurodivergency. And yeah, I was kind of like, man, I'm just not finding anything. So I'm gonna definitely have to do some more research on it, but I'm very interested in this character.
Now, I'm actually not familiar with this character. So for me and other audience members who aren't, can you give a synopsis of who this person is and why you're interested in the character?
Go ahead, Kelly.
So Monet is autistic. I forget what her powers are. Anthony, did you get what her powers were when you were researching?
Let me pull it up.
I think she's psychic because they're all psychic. They're not all psychic.
But but to put it just to kind of why I'm interested is because actually it is literally about 5 years ago since I was diagnosed with autism. It was around this time I got at the beginning of the month I got tested, and then a few weeks later they told me that I had autism. And at first I was just kind of like, I was very I didn't really know what to say because I didn't know what to think. But like as the years went on, I started to accept it, and then I started to kind of just utilize it and say that, you know, it's my superpower and stuff like that. But on top of that, I've been more kind of wanting to spread word about it and like how to help other people out. So, and another thing that I've been thinking about is like, how is that represented in media? Like you always have movies and shows that always show like a character who is on the spectrum. Like the one that a lot of people can kind of come up with off the top of their head is probably the movie Rain Man, where Tom Cruise's brother, Dustin Hoffman, is narcissistic savant. And yeah, I think it's a good movie, but it is definitely not aged well. Like
no.
But I've also been thinking about other ways that they're showing representation, and I think it's getting better. But yeah. But anyway, so as I'm looking up Monet, she has superhuman physiology, regeneration, flight, telepathy, telekinesis, life form fusion. So yeah, she's really smart too.
Kara, is that you? With that power set. I said, Kara, is that you? With that power set, it sounds very similar to Supergirl. Besides the telepathy.
I mean, DC and Marvel famously crib off each other all the time, especially because they're always trading writers and artists back and forth. Not surprising, but she's a character that I need to read more about her, but I know that she is canon autistic. And honestly, X-Men has a lot of characters with disabilities. You could argue Rogue's inability to touch people is a disability. Professor X, of course, is paraplegic. So
and that's Nightcrawler, his appearance. I mean, I don't know, like, I guess in our world that would be considered, it might be considered like some disability, but I don't know how to approach that one, to be honest.
It's hard to imagine him like working at Burger King, right? Like that would definitely be, I think, seen as a hindrance of some kind.
Yeah.
And it's cool that you bring up the disabled community, because I think that shows how, even though X-Men originally was more focused on the white-black civil rights stuff, X-Men has proven to be very malleable to talk about lots and lots and lots of different kinds of communities besides just the Black community. And like the disabled community is one that I think now, perhaps more than ever, needs the spotlight drawn on it. Because, again, as people who know me know, I'm not a super conspiracy nut type of person. I don't see shadowy, evil, malicious intent in like every corner of society. But I will say, I won't go into the details here, but if you look into what is actually happening with disabled people in this country, I don't say this lightly. I think there is a systemic oppression of disabled people going on in America that is coming from the top down in the government. What's happening with them is very, very disturbing, and I don't see it in the public discourse as much as it should be.
So Skylar just mentioned the storyline, a chamber with this facial disfiguring is a good example of extreme disability, because we throughout, like, even in real life, we do see people who have disfigures and stuff like that, where it's either just something small or like something like that, like facial disfiguration. So
and they're treated horribly.
Mm-hmm.
People are not kind to people with disfigurement. Like you had mentioned Nightcrawler. In the comics, he was, I mean, in his village, he was chased out. People treated him like he was a demon.
And then ironically, he's like a Christian minister, which I think is one of the coolest things. Like that's why he's one of my favorite X-Men, because when I'd always known about him. Once again, growing up more with the movies and the video games, always picking Nightcrawler, but like seeing how he was in the second X-Men movie and how like always praying and stuff like that, and not using what happened to him as fuel for his hatred, and just like how peaceful he was. I thought that was just like a great character trait for him.
I love that about Nightcrawler. I love how, to use a phrase from one of my friends, Professor Hayes, he's just such a good little Catholic boy, right? Like he really is, and that is such a cool part of his character, and it does kind of channel that whole Christian nonviolent movement that was behind Dr. King and what was going on inside of that. It's a cool little nod to it, even though Dr. King was Protestant. It still has that same kind of jive going.
Well, if I may say this, like when we think about most Christianity, when it all boils down to it, we all worship the same God. So, and I won't go too much more on that, because we'll just leave it at that. But
and I'll just say amen to you.
But I lost what I was gonna say. I definitely think just knowing about how we have different, it's when we think about just the X-Men, just how many different voices there are and how many different people, like even Beast. Like when you think of the name Beast, you probably think of someone who's gonna like go Godzilla on a town or something like that. But just seeing he's like super intelligent, super smart, very diplomatic and stuff like that, subverting those original thoughts, or just like those original preconceived notions that people may have.
In the original Lee and Kirby run, there's a point where Hank is explaining his code name to the bad guys that he's beating up on, right? Because that's something he does repeatedly, is goes on these long monologues with people he's beating, right? And he talks about how much he hates that code name. How he really wishes that was not the code name he got, because he doesn't think it accurately represents his personality, right?
Well, and originally he didn't have the blue fur. He just had like big feet. So
Yeah, big hands, big feet, almost ape-like hands and feet, right? Was the thing they did.
And it's definitely a good thing they didn't use any sort of thing to like as a monkey or something like that. Like that definitely would have. Ironically, I actually had to talk to a student this week. For those of you guys who don't know, I'm a special ed teacher, but this thank you. So this one student ended up calling another one a monkey, and I called him outside and was like, "Hey, we don't say
no.
that." And he didn't understand. And I told him, I'm just like, "Here's the thing. When that was a word that slave owners would use to call their slaves. So
Yep.
and it's like, I mean, monkeys are animals, so it's just like it's something that is like seemingly innocent, but when you think about it, it's just like you don't call people monkeys.
It's dehumanizing. It not okay.
Let me info dump you while I clobber you.
Exactly.
Beast, the ADHD superhero. Skylar Productions.
I
You know
wonder.
what?
That's something I never thought of, him
Honestly,
being
is Beast
ADHD.
autistic? Like, I feel like he's autistic coded.
Yeah, I could see that.
You could make
And
that
that's a
argument.
thing in media. A lot of characters, this is not just X-Men, a lot of characters get autistic coded, but it's never confirmed in canon, which kind of drives me nuts. But
I partially get why it happens, because, and this is something that I'm still struggling with when it comes to media. I've seen like I really didn't start paying attention to it until after I accepted it myself. Like I think sometimes when you try to make a character autistic, um it's challenging, because one, not every autistic person has the same characteristics, and then you don't want to run into like someone who is stereotypical, like our Rayman characters. But like you see a couple different characters, like Abed from Community, who is like pretty much the first episode you can see like it is confirmed that he is autistic, and you can see like he's really into movies, and that's how he connects and things like that. And then there's series, I think it was Atypical, where the main character is autistic and wants to be able to, he basically wants to start dating and stuff like that, and just seeing like how he interacts with the world and things like that, and how others interact with them. And you see how his family is accommodating to him, and even some of the people at school are accommodating to him. And then there's another show that sadly only got 2 seasons, Not Dead Yet, where it's a show with Gina Rodriguez, and she comes back to America, and her roommate on the first episode says that he is autistic, and mentions how his brain works, how if things aren't a certain way, that it'll mess with his head. And then it even showed him a couple times dating. The first person that he dated, he had to mask around because he didn't feel that she would accept her for who he was. And then eventually he meets someone else who's very, I guess, type A personality. And there's this one scene where he's like, well, you see that she's like freaking out and she's really upset. And then he's just like, here's the thing. This is why I brought this to her, because I know it would calm her down. And just like seeing those moments where I think it understands people that are on the spectrum. And we definitely still have a far way for us to see these people, we're like have these characters where you see that it is a spectrum, and it's a good representation. And I just went on a very long rant, and I know there's more that I could say, but this is something that I've been thinking more about, and it's just like, okay, how can we do better?
Next year, autistic representation in the media. That's a panel.
Yes, that's it's gonna happen.
Skylar Production says Abed is a great character because he's relatable to many of us fans. I love Abed. I really do.
Yeah,
and
and
Skylar
and he
Productions. Oh, go
and
ahead.
it and he's definitely very smart, like as you see.
Hmm.
But yes, he definitely has those moments of hyper focus. Like the one that comes to mind is he was in that class for Nicolas Cage studies, and he watches all of his movies, and then comedically you see how it affects him, how he just full on goes Nick Cage, and
Oh,
it's
this is talking about Beast and why he's autistic.
oh, oops.
No, I'm showing them out of order. Clearly
Trail, we'll
wants to be
talk.
on that panel.
We'll talk.
We're-
We'll,
this is happening. I'm sorry, like y'all. Most of us, or not most of us, but a lot of us on the team are some flavor of neurodivergent. So we're just turning the multiverse fundraiser into the neurodivergent Comic Con.
Or just insane like me.
we're all a little insane.
Insane in the membrane.
Mm-hmm.
Y'all are not old enough to get that.
I understand it. I don't know the I understand the reference, but I don't understand the reference at the same time. We'll talk later.
Yeah, you're younger than me. It's okay.
Mm.
So I also have on my timeline just further into X-Men's history. There was a great graphic novel that came out called God Loves Man Kills that also really dove into or really leaned into the allegory. There was it and X2 kind of adapted the story. So God Loves Man Kills had a preacher who was just whipping up hate and getting people to persecute the X-Men. And this is just a great story that really underscored the X-Men as persecuted minority. And of course, X-Men history is filled with these stories, but this was a graphic novel that is taught in schools. It's, I think, Hollis, you have it on your curriculum, right?
I don't have it on my curriculum. It's brutal. That's part of why I don't,
Oh,
sadly. But it
fair.
is a brutal read. It is not like you read this
It's
for
not for
fun
kids.
entertainment. It is a uh, brutal read. Yeah, and it was written by Claremont, which shouldn't be surprising because he is largely responsible for X-Men as we know it today. Yeah, that what I appreciate about that book, like I said, is incredibly disturbing on a number of levels. What I really appreciate was the general allegory, I think, and the reason so many people can relate to that, because Chris Claremont talks about he got letters from all kinds of different members of minority groups, whether it was race, whether it was like sexuality, whatever, telling him like how deeply that graphic novel resonated with them. And I think a big reason behind that is that it is specifically it's attacking a general thing that is then applicable to all these different groups. And the general thing is the hate, right? Specifically hate that is in some way related to a religious dogma. And that is the idea. Part of why I think that title is so brilliant, Man Loves, God Hates, is the antagonist is pushing forward this idea that this entire race, these mutants, are just hated by God.
Do you mean
right? Oh,
wait? Wait,
It's
is it God Loves Man
Man
Kills?
Sorry, did I mess it up?
Yeah, I was just like, wait a
I messed
second.
it up. Oh, that was a bad.
That's what happens when we're live.
Yep.
That it happens.
We'll fix it in post. Oh wait,
fix it in post. Oh no, we can't. God Loves, Man Kills. Very big difference. That's the one. That's the one. It's and it's so the claim that God hates this group of people. And again, you have Nightcrawler in that story who's Catholic, and you have Kitty Pryde, who's really the protagonist of that story, who is Jewish. It comes this moment where it's like, how insane that idea really is, right? That if you believe in God as an all-loving creator, how on earth could God ever hate this group of people, any group of people, right? And that is kind of the crux moment of it, of how they dismantle the bad guy, because they don't just stop his scheme, they also go out there on public television and basically debate with him, more or less. And that was the real victory, was the moral victory, because like there's a great line afterwards where he used to have like this whole following behind him, and then afterwards, some cops who are watching the event and trying to keep the peace are like, yeah, I never heard that in Sunday school. Right, like the types of stuff he's talking about, and just the general dismantling of that worldview, I think, was really, really impactful for a lot of people.
I mean, hearing about it now, I'm actually really interested in reading it. I know you said
You should.
I
don't read it when you're already depressed.
No, I'll wait till spring, because
wait till you are very happy in your life and everything is going right, and you think to yourself, you know what, I'm a little bit too happy. Let's read something that's gonna bring me down a little bit. I mean, it does have a happy ending, but it's a brutal journey getting to that happy ending.
But it's a good book. It's an important book. Not all comics are happy all along. It's heavy.
I mean, it's
Crowley.
Yeah, that's I mean, I can't confirm nor deny that I have SAD, but considering that during this time in the past, I've always dealt with some form, like something's happened where I'm just like, it's just kind of like, but there was a line from Smallville that I heard where Lex was talking to Clark about the book To Kill a Mockingbird, and then Clark just asked him, he's like, oh, well, how does the book end? He's like, well, it's not about the ending, it's about the journey. And that's kind of what I like to think about, like how we get there. Definitely one of my favorite Clark Lex moments in the show.
That's such a good show. I know it's DC and this is Marvel, but you know what? Superheroes inspire us, and I feel like Superman also has a lot of similar lessons to X-Men.
Yeah.
Willow Skylar of Skylar Productions says, it's strange seeing the Friends of Humanity type groups still being a common adversary in both our countries. And I think this is why fiction is so important, because it teaches us empathy and it kind of shows us this allegory in a safe space that's free from the baggage, free from our preconceived notions of what we already think. And we can kind of enter this world, relate to these characters, and start learning these lessons. I know that sounds really preachy, but we can start learning these lessons and looking at things from a different point of view without all our preconceived notions, all our baggage of what we already think. And fiction is so powerful that way. And that's why superhero fiction has been around as long as it has, because it does give us a chance to explore things and learn that empathy. And it also gives us a lot of times a dash of hope. The quote that always resonates with me is that superhero fiction is not, it's not a fantasy about what if I had superpowers. It's a fantasy about what if someone with superpowers did the right thing. And X-Men is more complicated and layered with that, but at its heart, the X-Men is a team. And the reason X-Men resonates with us is because they're outsiders, like a lot of us feel like, but they have superpowers and they're still pulling together to do the right thing, which still resonates with us because they have their friends, they have their found family. So that's why I think X-Men resonates with us so much, because they're still pulling together to do the right thing, even in the face of the hatred they receive. And at the end of the day, they have each other, which is why that resonates with us. But in general, superhero fiction, I think, resonates because it tells the story of people with superpowers who care about humanity and who are making the right choices. And even though you all at home may not have superpowers, you still have power to make choices to do the right thing. That's the takeaway I want you to take from this panel. Do the next right thing.
Mm-hmm. And it's always easy to just see something wrong and ignore it, but just imagine like how you're gonna help the other person. And this was something else that we had a discussion, I think it was last week, about we've been talking about jazz music, and one of my students asked like, and I mentioned how like it was all based on spirituals that slaves would sing. And one of my students who loves to ask questions basically started talking about how he was just started asking all these questions about how he was just asking questions about slavery and how it started and stuff like that. And to make a long story short, I basically told him, this is like, it all starts with one person. It can be one person that can start a cause for good or start a cause for bad, and then it builds based off of that. So like, you can, like, I'm not saying, oh, you're going to be that one person, but one person can change how what someone does.
Takes a spark to light a fire.
Mm-hmm.
Welcome, Willow Schuyler.
Hey,
I'm glad you joined us.
I was actually debating on joining in for the whole conversation, but I'm just like, no, you guys have it. This is definitely a topic that I wish that I was a part of, but no, I'm a huge X-Men fan, and Beast is my favorite character. And of course, like later on in life, you do begin to realize that the characters mean more to you as an adult than when you were a kid, because you didn't understand a whole lot of the situations that they were fighting for. But yeah, Beast being has always been one of my favorite characters, because of he is the type that has fought for mutant rights. He's an advocate for they made him gay recently.
Really?
Within the last, I think it was the last 15 years. He became a gay character, which a lot of people are angry at that, because it's like, oh, I wish that they wouldn't do this, just make a character gay for no reason. But looking back at it, it's like it kind of does make sense, because he's always been the character to fight for different rights as the characters go on to different generations.
Yeah, I could see it.
I think they also made other characters gay, but I haven't been too up on recent comics. But
Iceman
Yeah.
is gay.
I don't know if this was just a movie thing, but no, it was a movie thing, because I know that Rogue and Gambit were always, but
Rogue and Gambit has always been an on again, off again relationship. I honestly kind of wish that they would get away from that.
Yeah, much to my dismay. I ship those two. That is my.
I love them.
X-Men ship.
I used to, like, as a kid, I used to, but now I'm just like, Rogue needs someone with a little bit more, substance to them. I don't know. Maybe I'm just grew past the whole charm of Gambit.
And and
it's on the version of Gambit.
Yeah. And that could always be like one of those things where it's like, that teen, there's that teen romance aspect, or romanticizing love and stuff like that. It's like, oh, this is the charming guy.
Okay, I will be specific. My ship is the 90s animated version of Rogue and Gambit, because that version of Gambit, I think, is a deeper character. He's got issues, don't get me wrong, but he also, like, that time when they're in the Savage Land and Gambit thinks he's about to die and he tells Rogue, I've never told this to anyone before, but I love you. Like, that's the Gambit that I like.
Yeah. Like, watching X-Men 97, and you do reconnect with the characters, and I don't want to spoil it for anyone who hasn't seen it. But there are some points in that show where it's heartbreaking, and it's like, the storyline with Rogue and Gambit in there, though, it's almost like you've been wanting to see this happen for forever. And it's like, finally.
I got to talk to the original X-Men animated series showrunner at a con, and he was actually telling me about how Gambit really wasn't much of a character until the X-Men animated series. So it's interesting, Hollis, that you said how much you enjoyed that character, because they told them that they wanted Gambit in the series, and he was like, but he hasn't had much of a story. So in the cartoon, in the cartoon, it seems like they kind of missed a lot of his storyline up until, like, they started dealing with the Morlocks. But well, he didn't have much of a storyline in the comics until the cartoon was like, so they made him what he is today, but the cartoon can only, they only have so much time. But
and sometimes it's just meant to sell toys. And I can heck, when I watched the cartoon, I always thought Gambit was the coolest, and whenever I would play the X-Men games, he would always be the one that I wanted to play as. Now it's Nightcrawler.
Yes. But we are almost to the top of the hour, so why don't you all share where people can find you and follow you in case they want to continue this conversation. Hollis, where can people find you?
People can find me on my Facebook page, which is facebook.com/HollisterWriter. That's my official social media page that I have, where I talk about my writing projects, things like that. You can also, if you're interested in the podcast that I do on superheroes and biblical studies, you can check out Sunday Morning Superheroes, which you can find on all the places you listen to podcasts. And you can also like it on Facebook if you want to.
Yes, you should. And it's going to be this Sunday morning. You're going to do a special live episode.
Yes, it's going to be a lot of fun. Going to talk about another heartbreaking story, the kid who collects Spider-Man.
Oh, no. Okay, Paley, what about you?
So I can be found on Blue Sky and Twitch at Paladin356, and on Facebook at Pelicash for cosplay. A lot of the stuff that I've been doing, I've done a lot of panels about retro gaming, but I've also been moving into panels that are doing deeper dives into certain series. Like I just did one about the Persona series, the themes that are involved in the Persona series, as well as like details about the characters and things like that. So that's something new that I'm starting to do. So definitely be on the lookout, because hopefully there will be some things coming in the pipeline that I'll be doing more stuff about.
Nice. And Willow?
Oh, okay. So I just started on Blue Sky, so I'm still a little baby on that one. You can find me, like, you can Google. You'll see. I'm on Facebook, YouTube, as Skylar Productions. I'm on Instagram and TikTok as well. So I'm trying to be everywhere.
And you're delightful. You're all delightful. I'm Phoenix's Entertainment pretty much everywhere. Definitely, I'm going to plug it again. Check out, let me find it. Check out Comic Story on Spotify podcast, and we're getting it a few other places where you can listen to your podcast. We're basically every week going to be tackling a new topic on how comics impact US history and vice versa. So we're pretty excited about it. Hollis and I have been having fun recording these episodes, so we're excited to release our baby into the world. Thank you all for listening or for watching, and check out our next hour. What do we have? Okay, up next we have indie comic creators, and then after that, Anthony and I are going to be interviewing Jerry Gaylord, who is the storyboard artist on X-Men 97. Speaking of X-Men, we just have a great Saturday in store for you all. So thank you for tuning in. Bye.
Bye, everybody.
The Multiverse Fundraiser is partnering with Comic Books for Kids to raise money for their cause. Their mission is to provide comic books to children in hospitals and cancer centers across the United States, Canada, and the UK. We believe in the importance of providing stories that promote hope and bravery to kids who are facing things that are scarier than any supervillain. And we truly believe in this cause. To donate, you can either go to our Facebook page at www.facebook.com/The Multiverse Fundraiser or directly to comicbooksforkids.org.
The Multiverse Fundraiser would like to thank our sponsors: Earth Dog Studios, Clobbern Comics, The Art of Brian Rodman, Studio Moonfall, Elusive Comics, and of course, the Phoenix Sisters Entertainment Network for hosting this event. Learn how to support these businesses on the MVFR website.